Hello everybody, I'm glad to be back. As I told you, I'm still working on part 5 of The Family of a Duchess, but I thought it's important that I address something else in the meantime. But before I do so, I just quickly want to talk about my sound issues that I had in part 4. And I think if you read the description box underneath my video, you will see that we had problems with our electricity supply due to the weather. And I was also unable to post the video on Friday or over the weekend due to interruptions in our internet services. I guess I could have retaped and re-narrated the video this morning, being Monday morning, but in all honesty, I just didn't feel like it. I felt that it was of less importance, in particular because of what happened to other people in my town over the weekend, and therefore decided to post it regardless. I do believe that you are able to hear the more important information in any event. What happened in our town was that a friend or an acquaintance of mine, somebody whom I swapped succulents with on a regular basis, dropped his daughter, who was visiting from Cape Town, off with her mother Friday evening and subsequently disappeared. Um, Everyone phoned about and used Facebook to try and get the message out over the weekend, and friends of mine also went out searching. Long story short, his vehicle was found about 200 meters into the bush in a river, and his body a couple of meters further away. And it became apparent that he was swept away in a flash flood. Our region is very dry, and we just experienced a very long drought. So with the heavy rains, these rivers are filled with debris and tree trunks, etc. And I guess coming back at night time, he did not see the rising swell of the river and went into it and was swept away. I just want to convey my condolences to the family of Ronnie van der Walt and tell them that we really appreciated him as a human being while he was still with us. So I wish them strength and lots of love. And now let's talk about Harry and Meghan. The reason why I feel I need to speak to you guys today about Meghan and Harry is mainly due to the fact that they brought out this video along with some teenagers for Mental Health Day. And once again, I do not comment on all the Zoom calls and all the talks they have with everybody, because a lot of it is, in Meghan's words, just noise. However, I felt that it's needed and necessary for me to address this particular video. And before I do so, I would like to refer you to Murky Meg's video on the same subject, as I felt that she made it very clear as to how I personally feel about it. So before I start talking about the mental health video along with the teenagers, I thought of something else. People have asked me to comment on Harry and Meghan's video that they made in South Africa, Harry and Meghan, An African Journey. And I honestly tried to watch that video. But time and time again, about 30 seconds in, I would be so mad, so irritable, that I could not bring myself to watch the whole thing. Of course, I've seen clips on Instagram and on YouTube, but I just couldn't bring myself so far as to watch the entire 30-minute or 48-minute video. However, having watched the full 30-minute video on the mental health talk with the teenagers, I stopped myself and I thought, let me watch An African Journey before I comment on this particular video. Now, as most of you will know, the video An African Journey was produced or narrated by Tom Bradby, I could never remember his name, so I had to write it down. And the reason why I got mad and why I got angry and couldn't watch the rest of the video is because a couple of seconds into the video, Tom mentions the poverty and that it's blighted by racial segregation, blah, blah, blah. And I immediately knew which direction this video would take, and I also knew what would be coming from Meghan and Harry. And to keep my health and blood pressure in check, I decided not to watch it. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. You of course know which video I'm talking about. It's the one in which Meghan calls other people, and in younger, poor people, people suffering from poverty and criminality and violence, where she stood up on a tree stump and called herself a mother and a sister. But I'll talk about that a bit later. Anyway, also the video in which Tom Bradby said or called Harry a man still wrestling with the legacy and the tragic death of his mother, wrestling with the legacy of his background and his birth. And I thought, oh, shame. Anyway, it is my opinion, and I can give it to you before I even go into this any further. It is my opinion that the tone of this video was decided on before Harry and Meghan even went to South Africa. It was discussed with Tom Bradby, and he was given the basic narrative, because I do feel that throughout the video, and even when it pertains to what they tell him and their comments, that he led them into making these poor me statements. But I'll talk about that a bit more. Okay, so on day one, Tom Bradby drives around in a vehicle with another lady, a coloured or black lady. I would guess it's a black lady if I listen to her accent. Anyway, so they're driving around, and then he points out a fairly upmarket suburb, and he tells about how beautiful Cape Town is, and that it's an international playground. And then he adds, if you are rich, and largely still if you are white. Now, Tom Bradby obviously did not do his homework, because in South Africa there is no more racial segregation. I was an estate agent, and I would have been criminally charged. I would have not only lost my job, but I would have been charged had I refused to sell a property to anyone, white or black. We do not have racial segregation in our towns or townships anymore. Of course, there are more black people living in townships and living in poverty than there are white people. But there are white townships at the moment, currently, and for the past how many years, where poor white people live in shacks, similar to that of black and coloured people. They do exist, and I have made a video about that way back. So if you guys scroll back, you will find that video and photographs as receipts. It is true. However, I would agree, there are more black people suffering from poverty than there are white people, and there are more black poor townships than there are white townships, although the white townships exist. Now, why is that so? And my answer would be pure and simple, because the black people outnumber white people with approximately, and I'm not sure about this, so I'm talking under correction, about 9 to 15 to 1. Okay? So it's a numbers game. We have a system in South Africa that's called BEE or BBEEE. And if you want to know about that, I would refer you to the Loving Life channel where Scott will explain exactly what BEE and BBEEE is. In short, it is basically where people in South Africa, when they are employed or when businesses employ people, they have to employ people according to the racial ratio of races in this country. So they need to employ more black people than they do white people because there are less whites in this country than there are black people in South Africa. So that is in short, it's not all it entails, but in short, that is basically what it entails. BEE and BBEE. However, due to our economy, which has taken such a huge nosedive due to dismanagement, mismanagement, this country cannot employ all its people. And yes, then I will agree with others, the more liberal people, that there is a backlog in education when it comes to people of color. That is true. However, it's a backlog which is now fast and radically being wiped out. And if you do not believe me, please, you have my invitation to come and visit this country. I will take you around to schools and universities where you can witness the number of black students versus the number of white students for yourself. The fact of the matter remains that there are more black people in this country than there are white people, and that this country is unable to give jobs to all its people, or the majority of this people, due to our economy. And hence, there are more poverty-stricken black people than there are poverty-stricken white people. But there are poverty-stricken South Africans of all races all over the country. So yeah, obviously Tom Bradby did not do much, if any, fact checking before he introduced this video, and he literally pissed me off even before I started watching it. Tom Bradby then goes on to name Nyanga as the murder capital of South Africa, and he mentions that there were 300 murders in the last year alone, which is fine. I'm not going to argue with his statistics. But then he goes on to blame that on decades of institutional racism. And this is where I call bullshit. Because if you look at the statistics, it indeed says that Cape Town is the city in South Africa with the highest murder rate in the country. So, yeah, whether it's in Nyanga, which is part of Cape Town, or Cape Town as a whole, I'm not going to argue that. I am, however, going to argue with him when it comes to the reason for the increase in the murder rate in Cape Town. And it's definitely not due to decades of institutional racism, Tom Bradby. It is very clear, and you can even ask the very people you interviewed, the very people who live in Cape Town, who live in Nyanga, what the reason is for the high murder rate. And it says the increase in the murder rate in Cape Town is driven by gang violence, which has been exacerbated by the supply of thousands of illegal firearms to criminal gangs. Yes, Mr. Tom Bradby, it is not due to institutional racism, but due to criminality. Criminality. People with illegal firearms, gangs, killing one another and killing innocent people. It actually got so bad that last year the government put military personnel into some of these suburbs to try and curb the criminal activity. It has nothing to do with institutional racism or even racism, as the murders in the townships are often black on black or coloured on coloured, with no interference from any other races. And if Tom Bradby would have done his homework, he would have discovered that for himself. But yet he found that it was way more interesting and way more fitting of Harry and Meghan's narrative to blame the Nyanga murder rate on institutional racism. So Tom Bradby, I'm calling you out on this. You are talking BS, my dear. And so are your friends Meghan and Harry. Okay, so talking about the Nyanga, they visited the Justice Desk, which is financially being supported by the Commonwealth Trust. And as I said, that is where Meghan stood on a tree stump and spoke to mostly black or women of colour and tells them that she had identified as a woman of colour all her life. Again, BS to Meghan Markle. BS, Meghan Markle, because I have a screenshot where you put on your resume that you are Caucasian, in other words, white. If you had identified as a woman of colour, why have you never been engaged or married to a man of colour? Once you've answered me that, then I may give you credit for having said that. In the meantime, buzz off. I'm trying hard not to rant here. Trying hard to keep calm and stay calm. Anyway, she obviously then called herself a mother. Now, whether she is the mother of a surrogate baby or adopted baby, if she believes herself to be a mother, and if she adopted a baby, then she is a mother. Okay, a wife, well, she's married to Harry. Woman of colour, I've addressed that already. And a sister to people who live in poverty. A sister of people who have to attend the justice desk to be taught how to protect themselves. People who do not have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 men acting as their security every time they go home. No, they go home on their own, mostly by public transport or they walk, whereas Meghan and Harry had some secure Land Rovers imported into this country, and I have spoken about that before. So once they drove off with the hordes of security, these women most likely walked back home through a dangerous township. At some point in the early parts of the video, Tom Bradby also refers to Meghan as Harry's new wife who had to wrestle with a new country, a new job, a new life, a new family, a new baby. Well, once again, I felt the irritation like worms in my intestines. It just crawled into all these nooks and crannies of my body, and I wanted to scratch myself. You know what? We have all moved at least once in our lifetime. And whether you move to a new country or a new town, how different is it? When you move to a new area, you find yourself in a new surrounding with new people, people you don't know. Okay? My children immigrated to Canada. They've never set foot in Canada before. However, they now live there for it will be 3 years in April. Of course, it took them a while to adapt. But within weeks, my daughter had a new job. Yes, just like Meghan. Within weeks, my daughter had a new job. She was living in a new country, she had a new job and a new life, and although they don't have any family there, they very quickly made new friends, and a year later they also had a new baby. A baby who was born at 24 weeks at the McMaster Hospital. And just for those of you who don't know, the baby is doing fine. She's a cutie pie, and she is now, I think, about 17 months old. She's more or less the same age as Archie, a month older, according to the date she was born and not her biological age, because like I said, she was born at 24 weeks. So yeah, my kids were in the exact same position. New country, new job, new life, new friends, and indeed a new baby. And I am yet to hear my daughter complain. Instead, she is grateful to Canada for taking them in. She is grateful for the lovely home she now lives in. She is grateful that she had a wonderful hospital like the McMaster Hospital available to save this baby, a baby who may not have lived had they still lived in South Africa. Although we do have the odd good or bright or excellent hospital here in South Africa, they are few and far between. So my children, my daughter, my son-in-law are grateful, and they can't stop being grateful to Canada and its people. And each and every time we speak, they express their gratefulness. And these are two young people who had to go look for new jobs, had to go look for a new home. Something Meghan did not need to do. She was provided with a new home, a luxurious new home. She was given a new life and a new job without her having to apply along with others for the new job. She lived in luxury with security and staff, and she needs to come talk to us here in South Africa about how she struggled, or Tom Bradby had to mention how she had to wrestle with a new country, a new job, a new life, new family, new baby. How dare she? How dare he? How dare he? I have a cousin in New Zealand who did the same. He went on a trip to New Zealand, spoke to people, found himself a job, came back, applied for immigration, and immigrated. He had to work to build a home for his family, and once he had, he brought his family across to New Zealand. He did not have the luxury of a job waiting for him, a home, luxurious home waiting for him. And the same with many of my friends and family. Then Tom Bradby asks Meghan at some point whether they will be doing anything, starting new projects to help with the various issues here in South Africa. And Meghan answers him with, "It will be inauthentic to be here and not ask what we can do to help." That is, coming from a woman who all she could do were to bring colouring books and pencils and Archie's second-hand clothes. And the places they visited were supported by the Commonwealth Trust. Commonwealth Trust, for which she is supposed to work while she's sitting on her backside in California, in Montecito, and talk shite. Right, at some point during Heritage Day, during our Heritage Day, they talked about District 6, and once again Tom Bradby makes sure to drive past the area that once was District 6. And of course he had to mention it to be the shadow of segregation. Well, I have news for Tom Bradby. District 6 was probably one of the first integrated areas in South Africa where people of different colours and races, including white, lived. And yeah, there may have been, or there was, more people of colour living there than white people, but I personally know of quite a handful and quite a number of white people who used to live in District 6 because it was the arty-farty thing to do at the time. So once again, Tom Bradby did not do his homework. However, what I really smiled about, and I was really tickled pink by it, just a pity he did not allow, or when it came to cutting this video, they did not allow the young lady to finish what she was saying. But they showed a young lady who said that she was happy with Meghan because it gave them the opportunity to talk about being mixed race and that it is okay to be mixed. And that's all he allowed her to say. Had he allowed her to finish speaking, she would have told him what it was like for her to grow up mixed race in this country. Mixed race in this country is probably something we as South Africans are more used to than most Britons or most Americans, because it even happened during apartheid. As a matter of fact, I'm in my late 50s and I had a mixed race girl in my school. She was a year older than me. I'm still in touch with her via Facebook, and her family had never been treated differently from anyone else in our town. We were not, as children, told or taught to treat this child differently. And then there were also a handful of other mixed race children who went to another school in our district. But we were aware of them, we played with them. When our fathers did business, the kids would come along and they were just children. We just all played together. Only as we grew up did we realize that they were mixed race. As children, we did not know. And by the time they grew up, things had already started to change in this country. Today, it's a common sight to see a mixed race children. My grandson went to school when he was still in public school. A number of children in his class and in his school are of mixed race. And he did not even notice. And to this day, he still doesn't understand or notice or really care about it. So, thumbs down to Tom Bradby for not allowing this young lady to actually finish speaking. But he does it once again because it does not fit the narrative they wanted to portray in this video. But I'll come to that. Okay, so on Heritage Day, they visit District 6, etc., etc. They have the Cape Minstrels singing and marching, which is something they do on Heritage Day anyway, not just because of Harry and Meghan. And it was told to me that on that day in particular, the journalist had a hard time to collect enough people to form a crowd so that it would appear as if they were there for Harry and Meghan, because most of the people out and about were there to look at the minstrels. Okay, then we go on to the visit with Archbishop Tutu. Now, personally, I respect Archbishop Tutu. As a matter of fact, we have always had a few loving and endearing nicknames for Archbishop Tutu, none of which are derogatory. I remember when I was younger, people used to call him South Africa's own Elvis Presley. And the reason why he was called that was because he got so animated when he spoke that it actually looked as if he was dancing. So even before 1994, there were many people of all races in this country who actually adored Bishop Tutu. And after 1994, when he was seen more regularly in the media and round and about, more people found him endearing. And I personally do not know of anybody who actually do not like Archbishop Tutu here in South Africa. And even for the handful of people who perhaps have some negative things to say, they will give their opinion, but end up smiling about his character. So, yeah, the fact that they visited Archbishop Tutu, I think there are a lot of us South Africans who would like to meet him. What I did not like was when Tom Bradby again interviewed Meghan during or just after the visit, and she was waxing lyrical about how Archie will look back at that moment and blah, 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 forgetting that Archie was only 4 or 5 months old at the time. So how the heck would Archie be looking back at that moment, at the moment of meeting Archbishop Tutu? All right, getting back to Heritage Day, I digressed a little. Once again, Tom Bradby or his editors cut the video at a very important moment. And that was when they were interviewing a man in a blue shirt. I don't know his name, but they were interviewing him, and he actually started saying, we don't see Meghan as a woman of colour, as we don't see colour. And that is where they cut this man off. They edited the rest of what he had to say. They edited it out. Why? Because it's the truth. Like in any other country, we do have people who, like the skinheads and like the Ku Klux Klan, etc., etc., will act out their racial prejudice. However, the normal people, man on the street, boots on the ground, the average Joe Soap, the guy who goes out and works every day, we don't really see colour anymore. We don't. We can't. I mean, imagine I got sick in the middle of the night and I had to be transported by ambulance to a hospital in a nearby town. I could not choose who transported me there. I could not choose which doctor to see. Now, can you imagine if we as normal South Africans, boots on the ground people, average Joe Soaps, if we were so racially prejudiced that we do not want to see a black doctor, a black dentist, or dentist of colour, or doctor of colour, be it Indian, Pakistani, whatever, I would have died that night if I was that racially prejudiced. And that applies to each and every other person in this darn country. We have black teachers. So if you're racially prejudiced, what are you going to do? How are you going to have your children educated? We have black doctors, dentists, lawyers. So what I'm telling you guys is if we were as bad as Tom Bradby was trying to make us out to be, none of us would be here anymore. And that is without taking the racial violence into consideration. That is leaving that aside. We cannot afford to be racially prejudiced in this country anymore. Due to the ratio of white and black people, as well as the fact that we as white people had to learn very quickly after 1994 to look past colour. We had to. It was essential to our health, our education, and everything else in our lives. We had to. Okay, but like I said, it did not fit Tom Bradby's narrative, and it obviously didn't fit Harry and Meghan's narrative. Otherwise, they would have interfered when this thing was shown to them. This documentary was shown to them, and they would have told Tom Bradby, look, this is not true. We don't like the slant of this documentary. But nobody interfered, nobody interrupted, and nobody stopped it. So it went out filled with bloody lies. I'm not going to talk much about Harry's trip to Botswana. He was basically there to see the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy. It's an organization planting trees in Botswana. And Harry deserves to be respected and liked in Botswana because he has a history with the people of Botswana. His mother did a lot of good in Botswana, and Harry continued her work after her death. So there's not much to say about Harry's visit to Botswana, and he deserves whatever respect and friendship he gets from the people of Botswana. Okay, so let's move on to day 5, the visit to Angola, where Harry saw to the or visited the Halo Trust, which is a demining charity, and where he supposedly followed in Diana's footsteps. Diana visited Angola in 1997, and we saw her walking down that lane filled with anti-mine boards, landmine boards, warning of landmines, etc. However, I am telling you, and this is no lie, and they even pointed to it in the video, but they did not pay enough attention, in my opinion, to the same fact. The place where Diana walked at the time, that famous walk of hers, walking past all these anti-landmine signs, etc., is now actually a street, paved, built up, etc. It has now been turned into part of the nearby town. So, the fact that Harry, all geared out, walked among those non or anti-landmine boards, as we saw him do, was a complete setup. A complete setup. It was a photo op. And by saying that, I'm not saying that there are no more landmines. As a matter of fact, the organization, the Halo Trust, are hoping to get rid of all landmines by 2025. Because these landmines were planted in odd areas, in the bush, on walking trails, etc. So there is still the odd one out there somewhere. And often, more often than not, they are found by accident. And it costs someone a limb or their life. But there are not that many in specific areas like there used to be. And like I said, where Diana walked in the past is now part of a town. It's all built up, paved over, etc. So where Harry walked was just a complete setup. A photo op, staged, and nothing else. Anyway, they then went on to, or Tom Bradby went on to interview Harry, and they spoke about the festering wound that the death of his mother left in him. And then obviously he uttered the famous sentence, "Every time I hear a click, see a flash from a camera, I think of my mother." Yet here he is now in Montecito in the United States, and we see him in front of the cameras way more often than we ever did while they resided in Britain. So I think that sentence has long since been proven to be utter BS. He goes on to say, and here once again I took serious offense, that he aims to uphold the values of his mother, and then he says, despite his role and the job. So what is Harry saying here? Harry is saying that his values, that his mother's values are not compatible with the values of the job he was doing as Duke of Sussex or Prince of Britain. That is what he said there. And when he said that, I knew the poo was about to hit the fan. And then he also said, and that followed this sentence very quickly, when he said he hopes and promises to uphold the values of his mother despite the role and his job. And then he actually said, if anyone else knew what I knew, and he left his sentence open-ended. Now that makes me wonder, what does Harry think he knows that we do not know about the royal family? And I would actually like him to one day lay it all out and tell us, tell the whole world what he thinks he knows. That would be interesting. Anyway, then they carry on talking about the rift with his brother, which he basically disputes at the time, and he says that they're just taking different directions, blah, 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 which we also now know is not true. And then at some point he talks about Sentabale. And here, watching his body language, watching his face, and seeing how excited and how animated he gets when he talks about Sentabale, makes me wonder what happened to Harry. Because if Harry was so excited and so happy, and if Sentabale brought him such joy and such fulfillment, how could he walk away from it? Why did he walk away from it? How sad is it that he walked away from it? What a loss to the people, to Diana's legacy, to these AIDS victims, the fact that Harry walked away from Sentabale and from his role as a prince, from someone who got personal joy out of the work he did for Sentabale. How is this possible? And then I think it was in Malawi where Tom Bradby asked him whether, seeing that he loves Africa and South Africa so much, whether he would ever consider coming to live in South Africa. And that is where Harry says, yeah, he would, but he wouldn't know where, because with all the problems, and he also sort of leaves that open-ended, not addressing the problems. Okay, we don't expect them to get involved with our politics, and we would have been very offended had they. But I think Tom Bradby caught him unaware with this question. Because if you look at what's happening in the United States at the moment with BLM and all the riots and protests, etc., it's very similar to what is happening here. Although I know, I'm not guessing, I know that our crime rate is much higher. But with the kind of security that Meghan and Harry has, and with the kind of money backing them to buy property worth millions, they could have done the exact same thing here in South Africa. They could have. And they would have been, I would say, 99% as safe, having that kind of money, having that kind of security. They would have been very close to being as safe in Cape Town as they would have been in LA, for instance. Yeah, because, the crime rate applies to us normal people, the people who cannot afford that kind of security. It does not apply to the rich. Okay, so let's end this up. So on day 9, they announced that they were suing the press. Why announce it in South Africa? Because up until then, the press, which included the British press and journalists, they were here in droves, the press were actually treating them very well here in South Africa. And the press, unlike people like me, the press was very complimentary about their visit. I remember reading articles in British papers, local papers, German magazines about their visit and thinking, "Ugh, what trash, this is rubbish, or this is not true, etc." I remember reading that. But that was me, an individual. The press overall, including the South African press and including the British press, were treating them with kid gloves, were complimenting them, were treating them very well during their visit here in South Africa. Yet they used this visit to announce that they are suing the press. Why? In my opinion, they did it because they knew that would give them the biggest exposure. Once they were back in Britain, they would have had less journalists from fewer countries surrounding them than they had during their official visit. And that is why they announced it in South Africa. And that is why I believe they used their visit to South Africa to preempt them leaving the British royal family. We as South Africans were of little to no interest to them, as were our problems at the time, or our current problems. They don't give a rat's ass about our problems. They used us for their own narrative. They used us as a tool to reach their goals. And for that, I am deeply offended, because this touched a very raw nerve in me, in my friends, in my acquaintances, and everyone else I spoke to. And people who were positive about them before they visited the country, people who were looking forward to their visit, people who did not agree with me on their personalities, have subsequently changed their opinion and told me that I was right all along. So let's just quickly talk about this mental health day interview that they had with the teenagers, because I'm adding it to this because Meghan actually in this talk with the teenagers brings up what she said in South Africa when she complained about it's not enough to just survive, but you have to thrive, and so on, and thank you for asking how I am, and you know the story. Anyway, she brought it up in this video, and then she uses the excuse that she was so tired because she was running this marathon between engagements and feeding Archie and engagements and giving him a bath, and she carries on and carries on. Now, I call utter bullshit on this. And why? Well, it's simple. Who breastfed Archie and gave him a bath when she was in New York watching Serena Williams play tennis? Good question, don't you think? But she can use that as an excuse for the whimpering she did in South Africa. Well, there's that, and then there's the fact that neither Harry nor Meghan are qualified to speak about mental health. I have not heard of either one of them being a qualified psychiatrist or psychologist, or even qualified in any kind of medical field. But that's neither here nor there. I think what they are doing comes from a place of utter ignorance. It comes from a place of self-indulgence. It comes from their narcissistic traits, personality traits, that they think they know it all. They can tell us all what to do, how to live, what to say, what to think. And I have just had about enough of that. Enough. They are dangerous, putting their false narrative out there to the public. They are dangerous, working with our youth who are still, due to lack of life experience, ignorant. And I'm not saying ignorant because of a lack of education. I'm saying ignorant because of a lack of life experience. And Meghan Markle, and to a lesser extent Harry, are now using that ignorance to put their narrative out into the public domain. And I have no idea, absolute no idea, how they can be made to shut the hell up or to just be quiet for a while. I don't know how. And I cannot advise anyone as to what to say, to think, or to do. But if these two people are not told to be quiet for a while, to address only the things they know something about, address your charities, address the pitfalls in the movie business. Meghan's been there, she's done that, she's been through those pitfalls. Speak to the youth about that. That's a life experience that she had. Harry had life experience with the military veterans. And when he supported his military veterans, he was doing a good job. Talk about that. Here are a few ideas for them, don't you think? But stop talking when it comes to things you know nothing about. And now this video is the longest one I have ever made. And I'm wondering whether it will actually be able to load on YouTube. But I'm going to try nonetheless. So I'm going to cut my goodbyes short. I'm going to say, take care of yourselves. Thank you for your support and bye.